it was quickly clear that Israel's not a democracy. That was just immediately obvious. I'm a black writer. Like, I'm the descendant of this. Are you telling me I gotta look away from segregation? When they don't want to come out and vote for you, do you not get it? Do you not understand why?
Public figures fear that they get marginalized over putting that view out publicly.
I don't give a fuck.
Ta-Nehisi Coates is an award-winning author and journalist who's been repeatedly called one of the most prominent American intellectuals of his generation. And with the release of his latest book, The Message, Coates is creating a lot of buzz. His book took him to South Carolina, Senegal, and the occupied West Bank.
The content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist.
One quick thing.
Yes, please.
It will not measure up to the burdens of what I saw Palestinians on the West Bank bearing.
Wow, that was really racist.
That was
pretty racist.
And it's that Israel-Palestine section of the book that has generated much of the media attention and controversy surrounding it. It's because he focuses on Israel's occupation of the West Bank, calls it an apartheid, and says he saw a system of segregation and oppression reminiscent of Jim Crow in the United States. And he joins us now from Oakland, California, Ta-Nehisi Coates. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on Real Talk.
Mohamed, thank you for having me.
No, it's a real pleasure. You know, I've been chasing you for weeks. And no, wait for it. Once I got it confirmed, I found out that, because I'm here in London in the UK, and your book doesn't come out here till February 2025. So I had to deal with an ebook. I had to settle for an ebook.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, and I'm sorry you had to chase. It's not like I've been doing anything. I've just been chilling. Just been chilling.
Let's actually get to that right away. I mean, how has this been? Because, you know, you've disappeared for several years, and then bam, you're here with a new book. And it's not just your book that's creating a buzz. It's you. People are debating your answers in interviews. People are talking about you. You've been turned into a meme recently. I don't know if you saw that, but there's yeah, you saw that, from your MSNBC interview. But how has the past few weeks been for you?
It's been pretty insane. I think a lot of people probably see like the backlash and the criticism. I don't actually see much of that because I had to, part of that meme you're talking about was that I hadn't seen that review, right? Like that was my first time seeing it. And I think that's good. It's like for my personal sanity. And I just think writers would do better to allow that process, the debate around the work that they create, to play out without them, really being in it so much. And so I've done that. But there is an aspect of this that I wish people could see, and maybe it couldn't happen if they could see it. But the thing is, a large part of my argument revolves around the fact that I am not the one to tell this story. I am telling the story. I'm telling it by default. I am, the one who is making these arguments by default, but that stories are best told when the people who have the most stake in them are the storytellers. And, we obviously don't have that situation, right? The result has been the reaction that I have gotten from Palestinians, from Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, from across the Middle East, the notes I've gotten, the lunches I've been to, the dinners I have been to. There's been an overwhelming amount of love. Love, yes. And I am grateful for that. I am extremely, extremely grateful for that.
Does it feel like it's already paying off, the efforts in the book, I mean?
Yes, because of that. Because that, I think like there's a lot of conversation right now, because I get asked about this. Well, Ta-Nehisi, this is great you did this. You forsook like the love of the quote unquote liberal establishment. And, I guess nobody really knows you. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, nobody really knows a person. Like a writer is a public figure. You can't really know what motivates that person. You know what I mean? What gets them up, early in the morning or keeps them up late at night. And I didn't become a writer so that certain people would, like shower me with awards and praise.
It's not about the celebrity life is what you're trying to say.
No, and it's just not. I love writing. Like I love writing. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that particular reaction is coming from the people who are at the center of the story. That is why it means something. It means something because they're at the center of the story. You know what I mean? It is divorced from questions of power, awards, accolades, even criticism and that sort of thing. It means something because it is coming from the people who I fundamentally believe, on some structural level, have been pushed out. You know what I mean? And not allowed to say this at this level. You know what I mean? Like, by which I mean on CBS this morning, all up and down, getting a reaction from the New York Times, the New York Atlantic, whoever. Like, to be having discussions like that. I mean, I don't think it's a very unfortunate thing.
Like I said, there's a lot I want to get through, but even before we discuss the book, I want to talk about the journey that brought you to it. There's been some discussion about one of your most celebrated essays, The Case for Reparations, right? In it, you talk about the financial recompense for the descendants of slaves in America. Now, obviously, the criticism for that essay came from the fact that you basically use the state of Israel as an analogy for Black America, suggesting that Germany's reparations for Israel, could be a model for the U.S. to follow. The criticism was because you overlooked, or the essay overlooked, Palestinian dispossession and oppression. And I think when it came up later, more recently, you pointed to what you called a default Zionism. Now, I just want to delve into that just a little bit with you. Like, at one point did you start seeing through this default Zionism?
Yeah, that's a complicated question because the fact of the matter is I was raised in a household where there always was like just this kind of skepticism, of Israel and the Israeli project. And what I mean by that is the notion that there should be a homeland carved out for this group of people who had been so persecuted by the West. It was always like my parents, you know what I mean, who had probably at that point in time, maybe not left the country, would certainly like be watching the news when I was a child, about the war in Lebanon. And with like, if you ask who they, felt, to be, I guess, an analog for themselves, they would say the Palestinian people, you know what I mean? And I remember comments like that, and I came up in a political environment where that was the case, but this was like in Coet, you know what I mean? It was not, they weren't writers, this was not made in a substantive sort of way. And when I became a journalist and where I became acquainted with how you write, how you gather evidence, how you report, what you read, how you make, serious cases, it just so happened that many of the people, who were teaching me that were people who would have been more sympathetic to Zionism than they would have had my parents' politics. So I learned my science in many ways. I wouldn't say from people who were necessarily outright Zionists. That's not what I would say. But with people who had a basic idea in their head that at best, Palestine, Israel was a tragedy in which two people had equally competing claims to land. Like that would have been the best version of it. And then there are worse versions of it. But I'm giving you the best one. Okay. That suffuses journalism. That notion suffuses American journalism. And it does not suffuse American journalism for conspiratorial reasons. It suffuses American journalism because American journalism is partial to America itself, to the American state project. And I want to be very, very specific about this. When the US government decided it was going to waterboard, the New York Times made a decision to say enhanced interrogation. It would not have done that for any other government. You understand? Like it would not, and this sort of, credulity that's given to the military, to the security state, to police officers, for instance, you know what I mean, is very deeply woven into American journalism, right? So what the American military does, it's we may have questions about it, but at base, these are good people. It's probably correct.
The intentions are never questioned.
Not really, not in any sort of deep way. Like the idea that, for instance, no, actually what you're pursuing is a colonialist project to do X, Y. No, that's an idea that would not be part of it. You know what I mean? That would not be something I would have heard. And so, that was a world in which I was working. And I think I knew that vaguely. And I guess I felt probably at the time as an individual, I can stand apart from it or whatever. Or I don't know what I thought, to be honest. But the article came out and the criticism was pretty quick. Like it was like within a week or so, like my recollection is it happened very shortly after the praise started happening.
And your immediate reaction to that was what?
I fucked up. I don't know how I fucked up. Like I don't know how. Like I don't have the analysis of it at that point in time. But wow, that was bad. And I got the analysis over the years. And then I really, really got the analysis, obviously, when I went over there. And I'm a writer, and so it's like one of these things that can't really be corrected by like going to a march or releasing a statement or signing an open letter. Like it has to be corrected in writing. It like you have to, do it the way you do it. So all of the energy that you invested in the case for reparations, you have to do something that reflects that same level of energy. You know, especially with something like this, when it's this big of a fuck up, when it's foundational. Like you have to, the thing you do has to be as loud as the error that you made.
Based on that point, I mean, going to the message and your experience, because again, what was so gripping about that section was seeing your anger and your shock basically in real time, like reading your thoughts in real time. So based on everything you just said, would you call that what you've been through with the message more of a learning process or an unlearning?
I would say learning. I mean, it's probably there's probably no way you learn something where you don't have to unlearn something else, after a certain age, So I would say it's all, it's been learning, it's been education, it's been enlightening, and it hasn't been enlightening about Palestine. It's been enlightening about the world, and that's what I was trying to get to. Like this forces us to face dark questions we want to look away from. About humanity itself.
I want to get some of your thoughts on Gaza too. I'm just going to read some stats. Over the past year since the war began, at least 43,000 have been killed in Gaza, over 100,000 injured, 1.9 million displaced. That's 90% of people in Gaza. More than half of the homes in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, 80% of commercial facilities, 87% of school buildings, 17 of 36 hospitals are partially functional. 68% of roads damaged. How has this past year been for you? How have you been taking this all in with respect to Gaza?
What's funny? When I was over there, I kept asking people like, this doesn't look like it has a non-violent conclusion. Like this, like it's like the only word I can use. It felt hot. Like even when it wasn't direct violence, like the amount of guns, there was something about the air, as crazy as that sounds, that just felt like this just doesn't go well. And so on some level, I have not been surprised, but on another level, it has been devastating. I didn't get to Gaza. I wanted to. And it was obviously, it's considerably more difficult than it is, to the West Bank. It is, it's been devastating. It really has been devastating. But I think it follows. Like, I don't think there are people who will tell you that, I don't know, like the Zionist project at its core, like had a kind of a fundamental goodness to it, and it got corrupted when certain people got their hands on it. And now we're at this point. Again, that's a certain argument that you'll get. But to me, because this was happening while I was writing and researching the message, like during the reading after I got back, I mean, it follows the conclusions of colonialism. Like it really does, it follows the notion that certain people's lives are worth less, and if you create a literature, if you create films, television, journalism that reflect this idea, then those numbers that you just read just become numbers. Like they're just numbers. They're not human lives. They're numbers. And I think they're regarded that way.
That's one of the things that's been a major topic over the past year, really, is just the dehumanization of Palestinians, right?
Yeah.
Because you've been off social media for quite some time, I mean, I'm sure you've been seeing the videos as well, but I'm just wondering if you have, been kind of checking them out, seeing the videos.
No, I actually can't. I haven't been. I can only consume so much, man. I
purposely avoiding it.
Yeah. That'll just be the weakness in me. Like I don't have it in me. What happened was during like after 2020, and watching George Floyd, and then it was like all of these videos, and I guess that was before 2020. At a certain point, I was like, I feel like I don't know that I am gaining information anymore. I feel like I know what this is, and I just I can't watch a guy plugged up to an IV burned alive. Like I don't have it in me. I'm not strong enough. That is the honest, appraisal of that, and so I haven't been.
In your book, you draw parallels between the Jim Crow South and the segregation that you saw in the occupied West Bank. With respect to Gaza, are there any parallels that you would draw to that?
One of the things about the message is that it argues that one of my big mistakes was like having not seen the thing and analogizing to it nonetheless.
Right, not being there up close.
Yes. And so I am like all of the parallels I would draw would be like they don't have the texture that they would have with the West Bank. They don't have the texture that they, would have with, say, Haifa or Jerusalem. So it's not that they aren't there. I am hesitant to draw them. I feel like I might get myself into trouble because they'd be like, that's not like as a thinker and as a writer, that's not how I really work. Like I am at my strongest when I've seen a thing and I can tell you this is what it is. You know what I mean? This is, like when I say, those roads and I analogize it to Jim Crow, like I went down those roads. Like I felt it myself, and so I'm sure they're there, but better people than me could probably make them.
You've described Gaza as a genocide, and it's a term that many in the American media, especially ones of your stature, would avoid or out of fear that they'd get sidelined for it, or newsrooms push back on it as well. But you decided it's the appropriate term. Why is that?
I mean, they said we are fighting human animals. Like these are exact quotes. There are no I'm sorry, I don't have them all on hand right now exactly, but there are no innocents in Gaza. Like these are quotes. I mean, I'm just listening to what people said. That is the language of extermination. So I am somewhat confounded by the notion that what I say and what I label and the words I use should be guided by how many powerful people are going to get angry at me. What is the use in being a writer? Like, I don't know what we're doing here. If we're going to write, then we're supposed to say what we see. And people getting mad at you is part of the process. Like that's just what it is. So I don't like, you know what I mean? Like I really don't know. I mean, and I'm not even going into like the citations of like, for instance, the human rights groups who have made that declaration themselves. There are a great many things in America that are not said. But the reason those things are not said, are not for any reason that any writer of integrity should respect.
The reason why I ask it, I think a lot of the fear that stems from it is because intellectuals or public figures fear that they get marginalized over putting that view out publicly.
But how does that, can I push back a little bit?
Go ahead, sir.
So how does that work? Like I think Gaza is genocide, and then what happens?
And then you don't get invited on, let's say, on the top networks anymore, or you don't get interviewed by the top magazines anymore. You kind of get relegated to an area which is exactly the whole point. You find yourself.
So are you saying I get to be here with you? I get to be here with you? That's what I'm saying.
And then it's just me and you for 6 hours.
And you know what? I would rather be here. I would rather be here though. I would rather like this is like one of the things like this I don't mean to get personal or get like get into psychotherapy, but like that thing I said at the top about people like not really I'm sorry, can I curse?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't give a fuck. Like I really like I love like obviously I like being honored. I like that people, you know what I mean, like my work. I like that I get invited on those networks to make those cases, but like at the end of the day, I close up my computer, I kiss my beautiful wife, I call my lovely son, you know what I mean? I hang out with my beautiful friends, you know what I mean? Those are the things. That's why when we started this conversation, I was talking about the love part, which people can, and the thing that I guess the reason why it is unfortunate to me that people can't see that is because part of this is what we model. And we model this notion that being a writer means that people with power and people with platforms are supposed to like you, want to put you on, or whatever. But what I want is to be respected by the people who are I guess I have no other way of saying this, by my people. The respect of my people is what matters, which does not mean that my people don't sometimes get angry at me, or sometimes don't like, you know what I mean, what I'm saying at that particular moment. It's not veto power, but the people who know, the people who recognize this and see what I see, like that's who matters. That's who matters at the end of the day. If you ask Ta-Nehisi, what would you rather have? You know what I mean? Would you rather have, the respect of those people, which is different than their complete and total agreement? I want to be clear about that. Or would you rather have all of the accolades and all of the woods? Brother, it's not a question. It's not a question about it. You got to be able to go home at the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like your kids, your family, they have to be able to look at you and respect you as a human being and as a person and as a writer. And so if you're out here dancing, because you might not get back invited on some network somewhere. I mean, I don't know what it was all for. I don't know why. Right, there are a lot of other ways where you can be more respected and become a lot wealthier than this. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes sense. And the point that I was trying to make is I think that's the position that a lot of Palestinians and pro-Palestinian voices find themselves in. Is
yes,
that even if they get invited, even if they do get invited on the top networks, it's always in limited doses, because at the end of the day, they're not really finding an audience for what they have to say, or the networks don't necessarily like what they have to offer.
Yeah. And I feel like it's like you acquire an amount of capital, but what was it for? Like, what is it? What do you want to use? And I take your point. I don't want to be dismissive of what you're saying. There was a certain amount of career capital that allows me to go certain places and say certain things, right? But why did I acquire that capital? You know what I mean? Like, did I acquire that capital simply to go to those places? Or did I acquire that capital to deliver a message when I'm there? And it may mean that after we get into this like with politicians, right? And so they don't take certain positions because they fear losing like their seat, right? But it's like, why did you want the seat in the first place? Listen, this is very simple to me. If the price of having access to those networks and to those places is that I have to act like I did not see apartheid, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm a Black writer. Like, I'm the descendant of this. And you telling me I got to look away from segregation, which is about the mildest word I can say about it? That's the price of it? No. I mean, I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know what we're doing here.
I'm going to jump right into the book now. I'm just going to delve right into it. One of the things I found striking was the Palestinians that you were meeting along the way. One of them is Walid Abu Halawa, for example. You guys were taking a walk on Al-Shuhada Street in Hebron. And the way Walid was talking to you, he's like, there's 126 Israeli cameras filming and recording the whole way, and there's a camera there, and there's a camera here, and he's telling this to you. And the way I took it in is if, Walid is almost as acting as a tour guide, but he's a tour guide of his own state of oppression or his own state of occupation. And I'm just trying, and I was like, I really want to know what Ta-Nehisi's thinking at this exact moment.
I was in disbelief. We have video of that, and some of it actually, Palfest put some of it out. But we like literally there's video of those moments, and I was just like, I think back on it because for him, this was just every day. Like, he's like, these cameras are here, 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 and here. And for him, it was like, this is fact. And I was just like are you sure? What? Really? Like, I was like amazed. But of course, I mean, it was true because you could see it. Like, he was literally pointing at the cameras here, and you could look up and see the camera. You know what I mean? So, I mean, obviously, and it was, dude, I was just dumbstruck. Like, that was day two. That was day two of the trip. That's in the morning. It's our second full day, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe it. And it's not like I went there thinking, make the desert bloom and, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like that. It was like I went there actually, thinking I was going to see something that, you know what it was? Like, I had a good friend and fellow writer, Eve Ewing, who went there with me, who was on the trip with me. And I called her, you know what I mean? Like the day before we were to leave. And I said, Eve, I'm scared. And she said, yeah, I'm scared too. And we weren't physically afraid. It wasn't like something's going to happen to me. It is, I think I'm going to see something. And when I come back, I will not be the same person. And that scares me because a part of my life will be over.
When you say over, what do you mean?
I mean, like, I'm going to be in the fight in a different way. Look, I'm used to scrutiny. I got scrutiny for Case for Reparations. I got scrutiny for Between the World and Me. This is obviously a whole other level. It's just a whole other level. You know, now, as I said, you know what I mean? We have to go back to first principles for why we're doing this in the first place. But if I just tell you what I saw, the forces that are going to line up and are going to be angry about that are legion. And the fight to see Palestinians as human beings is at a different point in America than the fight to see Black Americans as human beings. It's at a different, even as related as they are and as tied together as they are, and I believe they are, they're not at the same level. They just aren't. And so, like, recognizing that one is tied to the other and loudly and publicly making that case. And you're right, I was aware of my stature, and I was aware that, you know, I would be making that case in places that it's not usually made. For instance, that infamous CBS interview. I didn't know that was about to happen, but I knew that it would happen at some point. I knew that there would be a moment at one of these like places where, you know, it was gonna break out. And I think if I didn't have the words for all of that at that particular moment, you know, I knew that it was coming. And so when I'm there with Waleed and he's showing me that, like, there's a part of me that's like dying. There's a part of me that's going away. You know what I mean? Even as I see that.
One of the quotes that I read over and over again in your book was when you said, "I don't think I ever in my life felt the glare of racism burn stranger and more intense than in Israel." I mean,
Never.
Just hearing that back, how do you feel? Never.
No, never. I'm taken back there. You have to understand, like, for us, the most direct manifestations of American white supremacy are, with some exceptions, for instance, the police, they are, how do I put this? Jim Crow is not happening now. You know what I mean? Like, you're not right now told, you know what I mean, you can't, you know, go down this road. You see it there. Like, you see it. Like, this is an ongoing, this is not about history. This is about now. You know, and obviously it has a history. But this is about right now. You know, and so I'd never had that experience. I'd never had that experience.
Of all the things that you experienced, just based on that note right there, the segregation of the water supply, the Israeli settlements, the testimonies you heard from the Israeli soldiers about what they did to Palestinians, the evictions in Masafer Yatta, the Baruch Goldstein monument, the Israeli soldier who stopped you and asked you about your religion. I mean, of all these moments, is there one particular incident that just occupies your mind?
The Baruch Goldstein.
The Goldstein monument.
The monument. And well, there was a monument to Mir Kahane, and then there was Goldstein's tomb. And that people come there and they honor him for murdering Palestinians while they prayed. And this is not somewhere, you know, out in the wilderness. This is in a settlement that enjoys subsidies from the Israeli state. So this is part of it. This is part of it. And I was surprised to see that.
I also found it interesting how you were commenting on how Israel titles itself, right? How it calls itself the only democracy in the Middle East. And in the book you say, quote, "But by then I knew that the only democracy in the Middle East was essentially a tagline, which, like the breakfast of champions, or just do it, depended less on logic or observed reality than a form of word association." And then you carry on that it's basically used in a way that brings Herzl's dream to life, which is civilization against barbarism. Can you just expand on your thoughts here? I found it interesting that you chose to kind of delve into the title, this label of being the only democracy in the Middle East.
Well, The Message is a book about writing, and it's a book about words and how writing is deployed. And there are two parts to that tagline. There is the democracy part, and then there's the Middle East part. And it was quickly clear that Israel's not a democracy. Um, like that was just immediately obvious. You know what I mean? Like you tell me you got one set of laws for half the population and everybody else abides by a varying set of laws, you know, like according to what tier they're on. That's just not a democracy. You can't wipe out half the population, or you can't elevate half the population as citizens over everybody else and then call yourself. That's bullshit. You just can't do that. You know, so that was immediately not credible. Perhaps the more interesting part of it was the Middle East part, though. Because the Middle East part, what is in that is the only democracy in the Middle East. There's a silent contrast in that. That I guess is yeah. And I guess it originates from only, as you know what I mean, because the idea is that these other people don't have it. And what do we hear when we hear Middle East? Like, what do we like? Why does it matter that it's in the Middle East? You know, like what are we hearing when we hear that? And what we are conjuring is all of the stereotypes and all the ideas of and all the dehumanizing ideas, you know, that we have from people in that quote part of the world, end quote. You know, and it justifies so much. It justifies the violence. Well, the only language they understand is why we got to do X, Y, and Z. You know, we're surrounded by people who want to kill us, exterminate us, you know, and we're fighting for a democracy. And the Herzl part that you bring in there is just this idea that was always there. You know, where he says, you know, we'll be an outpost for, and I'm sorry if I'm not quoting this exactly, but we will be an outpost for civilization, you know, and what is essentially a barbarous part of the world. You see, that's very, very familiar to me because that's the language that was used to justify enslavement. That's exactly, we're going to bring civilization to these people. We're going to bring them over. We're going to teach them Christianity. We're going to make them into, you know, civilized, you know, people. And that, like, you start to see, oh, okay. And then you realize that America itself calls itself the oldest democracy in the world.
Oldest, yes.
The oldest. But you know that you come from an ethnic group that was eliminated from that idea well within the lifetime of your parents. And you start to see the pairing in that. You start to see how these two things are actually working together in such a way that they're parcels of the same system. The branding is so important. Because you say something, you say these things, you know, admit Israel has a right to exist. Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel is the only democracy. And you say it so much, and powerful people say it so much that the mind cuts off.
Sticks.
And you stop thinking about, what are you actually saying here? What are you really saying here? You know, and you don't interrogate it. The right to exist question, for instance, which I think is just like, we should spend a lot more time talking about that. You know, states are not people. States are not holy. States are tools. You know, states are tools, and hopefully they are tools to allow human beings and human life to prosper, as much human life as possible. You know, and when a state is not doing that job, it deserves scrutiny. You know, my screwdriver does not, you know, I'm not concerned with the rights of my screwdriver to exist, of my hammer to exist. I'm concerned with whether it does the job, man. You know, and so is the state doing the job that well-meaning and well-thinking and good people think it should do? That's the question.
What I'm thinking about right now is that on this whole thing about justification is that when it comes to your critics and those who you engage in debate with or pro-Israel or want to defend Israel, it's that you're basically taking away a key tool from the argument, which is the justification. You say, you know, I'm against apartheid, period. I don't want to hear any kind of justification. There is no because.
There's no because.
And then I think that's what's causing such an interesting debate with you right now.
Yeah.
Is that you're just taking that out. You're taking that tool out of the equation.
No, there's no because. There's no because. And if you think there is a because, that tells me a lot about you. And the reason why it tells me a lot about you is because there was always a because for slavery. There was always a because for Jim Crow. There was always a because for colonization, for colonialism. There was always a because. So when you start becausing, it means that under certain circumstances, you believe apartheid is appropriate. And then I know who I'm talking to, because I know that under circumstances, you would believe that my segregation was appropriate. You understand? Like, you really are no different. You think this is taking you out of the league of colonizers, conquerors, and, segregationists and white supremacists. In fact, you sound just like them, And so it's like, you have to decide whether you're for or against certain things. I mean, it's the example I use all the time. I'm against the death penalty. I don't care what the dude did or woman did. I just don't care. I am against it. As the child of, and the descendant of enslaved people, I am against enslavement. There's nothing white people could do that could make me say we should enslave them, break up their families, and sell their children. I'm not for it. There's no because. There's no because in my politics around that. And so when you start becausing apartheid, oh, the Palestinians are so violent. Oh, what about the suicide bombing that happened here? Oh, what about, this? What about that? But it's like, are you for it or against it? Like, do you believe this is an acceptable tool to be used against people or not? And if you think it is acceptable under certain conditions, then I'm against. I'm against you. I'm against that idea. Some things should be wiped out of the toolkit completely.
I want to ask also about your experience as a Black American who's written so much about the Black experience, right, in America. Slavery, segregation, civil rights movement, Martin Luther King. And then you go there and you witness that system, right? You witness the occupation. But you see it as being carried out in your name. Now, what are those thoughts like?
Painful. Deeply, deeply painful. And you start to see like your own privilege and your own power. And I think Black heritage and Black politics is tied up in that. And it's tied up in that because the United States tells a story about itself, which is that it has somehow overcome slavery, it has somehow overcome discrimination, and it has made itself better. And Martin Luther King as its patron saint of the best of America. But we are practicing the thing that we claim that we have overcome. We are practicing it. We are endorsing it. We are funding it somewhere else. So what does that say about who we are? And those of us who are the descendants of people who have suffered under those systems, I believe, have a very, very particular and special responsibility to do something about it. Because the hope is we didn't come out of Jim Crow. We didn't come out of slavery just to be partial to those systems being inflicted on other people.
If we flip that question a bit, what are your thoughts on Black U.S. officials who have the past year, become the face of America's Gaza policy? I mean, I think of that famous picture of Linda Thomas Greenfield, raising her hand and vetoing a ceasefire resolution at the UN. I think of, the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, Kamala Harris, which we'll get to in a bit. But, how do you think about that, particularly in relation to the notion of victims becoming oppressors, which you deal with in the book as well?
It's sad. I mean, it's sad. I mean, look, there are always, in any order, there are always going to be people that are going to ultimately buy in, to the order completely, wholly. That'll just always be the case. It saddens me more having seen what I saw. It is much more obviously acute for me right now. I do want to, and I have to reinforce this point because I think it's really important. The first people in Congress to call for, a ceasefire when that was actually a difficult thing to say, it was all Congress people of color, every single one of them. I have gone for this book tour, Black spaces, and repeatedly made the critique that I'm probably about to make when you ask me about Kamala Harris. I just want to be clear. I don't get shouted down. People know something's wrong, man. We know. And we have some people amongst us. We have a class of politicians who are not always the best, who are not always the most courageous. Part of my job is to clear ground for them to be more courageous, to make space for them to be more courageous, to give them incentive to be more courageous. And speak out on something that directly concerns them. But the answer to your question is it's very sad. It's very sad.
Might as well just jump on and ask you about Kamala right away. I mean, I'm going to read you a quote from an interview you gave New York Magazine recently. Should it turn out that we have our first Black woman president and our first South Asian president, and we continue to export 2,000-pound bombs to perpetrate a genocide in defense of a state that is practicing apartheid, I won't be able to just sit here and shake my head and say, well, that is unfortunate. I'm going to do what I can in the time that remains and the writing that I have to not allow that to be. And I also want to add to that, I mean, Kamala won't just be the first Black and South Asian woman president, but she'll be the first Howard University grad president as well. And I know how much that university means to you. But, how do you see Harris's role in America's Gaza policy?
I think a couple of things. I think the incentives are bad. I think the incentives are bad. In other words, it is not the case that you could plug in another Democrat and get a different result. The incentives are bad. I mean, they just really, really are bad. The power is arrayed against you. The interests interests that I'm only beginning to understand, to be honest with you, are arrayed against you. And so I get why it's difficult. There's a lot at stake right now. You know what I mean? In terms of domestic politics, I get why it's hard. I totally understand it. But what did we learn from our 400 years here? What did we learn? Like, what is the upshot of our politics? What was the experience? Like, what was it all for? What is the meaning we're trying to draw from it? And this just feels directly contrary to it. It just does. And so I've, been really outspoken. And I've been outspoken in the hopes that, not just that she will do something different or that she will act different, but that, others, of us whose dream it was, to have a Black woman president, we will demand something of that we won't just accept the symbolism of it, that it will have to mean something that she was that person. You understand what I'm saying? Like it'll like she will have to be, and this is a lot of weight to put on somebody, but it is what it is. For all of us, it is what it is. It's heavy. But that she won't just be another, Democratic president who's just kind of like watching this go by and watching this happen.
But there's no indication that she won't be if she wins.
There isn't. And I can't sit here and tell you that she will be. That's not. But I will say this. I do think politicians respond to pressure. The thing I think about, for instance, is I think about Abraham Lincoln a lot, who is now heralded as the great emancipator and one of the great presidents. A year before Abraham Lincoln runs for election in 1864, man, he is propagating a scheme to export Black people out of this country and move to Haiti. And he gathers a group of Black leaders and calls them to the White House and tells them, you all would be best somewhere else. Now, these are people who have been in this country longer than Abraham Lincoln's ancestors have been in. You'd be best somewhere else. And I think about the institution of the presidency. It has never been the case that Black people have had the luxury of looking up at it and saying, yes, this completely represents our politics. This represents our aspirations. This represents our hopes and dreams. It's always been a fight to try to press these people to do the right thing. And that was true in 1864, and it's true today. How that's going to go, what's going to happen, I can't sit here and tell you. You know what? I believe that Kamala Harris is the person to do X. I wouldn't tell you that about anybody. I just wouldn't. But I try to think about what I'm going to do and what I can do.
Let me ask you this then. What do you make of the anger that people are holding towards the Democrats, directing towards the Democrats right now?
Man, listen. Let me tell you something. I read a story a few months back, and the guy had been invited to the White House, I think. And he wrote this letter, and I'm sorry I don't have it on hand, but he was a doctor, and he wrote this letter, and he said, listen, 100 of my family members have been killed in Gaza. How the hell can I come and sit and have a meal with you, or have tea with you, or talk to you? How am I supposed to do that? So my answer to that is I understand it. Who would I be in that situation? That is the heart of my work. The heart of my work is empathy, right? Who would I be if that were me? Would I be out here saying, hey, Kamala, that's the way to go. That's the best way? I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I don't think I would. So look, I have my pragmatic analysis of that, but I just don't feel comfortable going out and telling people who are bearing the brunt of this violence that they need to fall in line. I don't have that in me.
And that's what I was going to ask you, is that what do you make of those who are basically calling and saying that they will vote for a third-party candidate, like Jill Stein, for example, even if it means a Trump win? They care about punishing the Democrats. Do you get that sentiment?
I do. I do. I don't think it's going to work, but I get it. I get the feeling. I have to be honest. The politics of it, I don't think the pragmatics of it are good. But I get it. I get it. I get it. And I'm not going to be the one to, go out there and say, like I said, shut up and fall in line. As somebody who comes from a community that has been told repeatedly to shut up and fall in line, I wish Kamala did better. I was out there at the DNC, when they wouldn't allow, they wouldn't even allow a Palestinian speaker to get on the mic. Like, I was there, I saw it. I think that was not just a mistake. I think it was cold and inhumane. And I think it was particularly cold and inhumane because there was a huge diversity party going on. And now you're saying these people can't speak. So when they don't want to come out and vote for you, like, do you not get it? Do you not understand why? So yeah, I understand it. I understand it. I don't know that it's gonna. It's tough, man, because like I said, I can't sit here and tell you there's gonna be, a different result. I will say this. I know what Trump is gonna do. And I know that there will be no pressure at all. You know what I mean? On him that'll move anything to make this better at all. Is there pressure on Kamala that could make it better? I do not know the answer to that. But I do know the other answer.
My pushback on that note is that people are already saying it can't get worse than this. We're like, what's worse than over, 42,000 killed? And that's a conservative estimate. That's not even counting the people who are under the rubble and all of that, the people who are missing. So I think the anger stems from this idea that, oh, we got to vote for Kamala because she's not Trump. But because Trump is somehow going to be worse, but we're already seeing the worst, is what I'm trying to say.
And so I guess the question I would ask of you is, do you actually believe it can't get worse?
I mean, would Trump give Netanyahu a carte blanche to do whatever he wants? Sure, but isn't that what he already has? Isn't that what he already has done in Gaza, but also in Lebanon and now escalating with Iran? I mean, what's going to be so different under a Trump administration? Again, I think this is the energy, the anger that's coming from people who are saying, the Democrats need to be punished over this, or this idea that, yes, we are willing to endure another 4 years of Trump, but as long as we send a message to the Democrats. I know a lot of people disagree with it, but I think that's where the sentiment is coming from, is that the Democrats have abetted this. I don't think there's anyone that believes that if the U.S. truly wanted to stop this war, that they wouldn't have.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, like, the question of whether it can get worse is not a question I can answer for a community that I'm not a part of. Okay. And so I really, really hesitate, you know what I mean, to wag my finger and say, yes, it can get worse, which is why, I wasn't deflecting by asking that question. I literally, mean that. I'll speak as a Black American. The situation you describe of, like, basically having to choose between people who are openly evil and people who you are not clear, would do any better. This has been most of our lives. This has been most of our lives as a people in this country. I raised the Abraham Lincoln example because, like, our choice at that moment in 1864, and I know it's remembered in a different kind of way, but our choice as Black people, to the extent that the very few of us who could actively vote, the slim minority, was between Abraham Lincoln, whose plan was to export Black people out of this country, and George McClellan, whose plan was to end the war, leave slavery, and allow slavery to expand. Lincoln had said openly, if I could end the war and leave Black people enslaved, I would do it. He said that. You know what I mean? Like our choices were disastrous. Years later, like a couple centuries later, we get Rutherford B. Hayes in 1876, right? This is a guy who, after Reconstruction, is going to allow the Ku Klux Klan to take the South again and completely deprive us of our votes and rule by lynch law. That was like the best option. That was the option that was being presented as the best option to us. It continues into the 20th century. As I wrote in the case for reparations with the New Deal, where the option was somebody that was going to construct a middle class on the basis of us being written out of it, man. It continues up through Clinton, you know what I mean? With like our quote unquote best option being somebody that, is going to sign on to a crime bill that is going to continue the expansion of mass incarceration. This is our history. And I'm not saying that, look, I'm not saying that just to tell anybody what they have to do, right? Like, this is not a Kamala endorsement, but I'm saying the calculus that you've outlined, that has been our political history, unfortunately. And this moment is probably the only time when it, I mean, I guess with Obama, I mean, I could, make the case, but let's say conservatively with Obama was maybe the first time when in a community that was not the calculus, man. It's ugly. It's really, really, really ugly. And I really, really want to reinforce this. I am not here to tell people whose whole families have been wiped out what they should do. I just don't think that's my role as a writer. I can do, like the pragmatics of it, etc. But something about that just burns at me.
One headline that I saw and I thought about maybe asking you about it this happened after you returned. This happened actually this summer. The government of Israel approved what's been dubbed the largest land grab in 30 years in the West Bank. Obviously the war on Gaza has offered some sort of smokescreen on what happens in the West Bank, but at the time the U.S. State Department called it counterproductive. That was their statement. And again, I know you're not here to offer solutions, but I do want to get your thoughts when you hear this news and reflect on it. I mean, if the U.S. isn't doing anything to end the war in Gaza and it's not really doing anything to freeze the settlements, I mean, how can the status quo really change?
I don't know. I really don't know. You got to remember, I'm a little bit more than a year off of my first trip there, man. And this is my first report. This is going to sound lame, incrementalist, but I do think a large part of this is that the American public itself is deeply misinformed. And it's deeply misinformed because the people who are closest to the story are not being allowed to tell the story. I really think that matters. I think it matters that, if I cut on CNN, the likelihood of me seeing a Palestinian or Arab face to narrate that is extremely, extremely low. That my newspapers, you know what I mean? The New York Times, that it's op-ed page, that it's reporters, there are very, very, very few people who are, at the heart of that story who are actually being given the power to tell it. To speak nothing of editors, producers, executives, people that make real decisions. They have actual power over what gets told and what gets not and what doesn't. The people laying down the frameworks are not there. And if we don't have information, if we can't see the thing clearly, all of this talk about solutions, and it's bullshit. Because you don't even know what you're dealing with. You don't have an accurate diagnosis of what the disease is, and we're talking about prescribing treatment. You're
describing, you're not prescribing.
Yes. But we don't have a description. We don't have a good one. Not in the American, and that was what was so shocking, that the description of it was so different from what I saw.
I'll circle back to the message and how you concluded it. After I was done, I thought about the fact that, how so many reporters go to Israel and they go to the West Bank, how so many members of Congress go, and yet very rarely do we hear the narrative that you gave, right?
Yeah, I don't know what they see. That was my question when I came. I was like, where do you guys go? Like, where do you go? Like, literally, where do you go? What do you see? And I don't know what it is. For the record, I did not have to go to the West Bank to see it. Like, I saw it in Jerusalem. Like, it's not like I was in Jerusalem and I was like, wow, this looks great. And then I went to the West Bank and I was like, what the hell is happening here? It was in Jerusalem. It was right there, you know? And so I literally do not know where they go.
Do you think if more Americans experienced what you did, the fabric of the U.S.-Israel relationship would change?
I think if more Americans had a clear view of what this actually was, if we threw out all of the obscuring phraseology, you know, for instance, only democracy in the Middle East, which we talked about. If we talked squarely about what was actually happening, if Americans knew, I think we would have a different politics. And maybe that sounds naive. I know there are people who say, you know, it's not that they don't know, it's that they don't care. I think that's wrong. And the reason why I think it's wrong is because so much energy is invested in people not knowing. If it was true that, you know, people wouldn't care if they knew, then there'd be no reason to keep Palestinians from talking. Like, that's the reason why. Like, if that was the case, then they'd have 10 Palestinians at the DNC. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to change the politics. So let them talk. But I think the people on the other side know very well that it will change the politics. Like, why would I get the pushback that I get? Why is this happening if no one's going to care? If no one's going to care, then there's no need for pushback, right? Doesn't matter. Either the stories are powerful or they're not. And I think they're very powerful.
You know, it was reported when you came back from your trip that one of the first people you saw was the Palestinian American academic and historian Rashid Khalidi. Just curious, you know, what was that conversation like? The first conversation after you came back. I mean, what did he say when you told him what you experienced?
He said, you saw what you saw. Because I was still in disbelief. And I just needed somebody to tell me, you really did see what you saw. And I just remember him saying, I said, I feel like I got conned. That's what I told him. I said, I feel like I got conned. And he said, Ta-Nehisi, don't feel bad. They have the best PR machine in the world. You know? And yeah, no, it was wonderful, man. He had me at his house, myself, my wife, his wife Mona was there, the great academic Mahmoud Mamdani. I think Mahmoud's an anthropologist. He was there, you know. Catherine Frank was there. It was just a good group. It was a good group of people who know, you know, and they were like, you really did see what you saw.
Let's say, you know, a year passes or 10 years or some time passes. How do you want us to look back on the message? Because you say you want to get out the way, but I want to get a deeper answer than that.
Yeah. Man, in my dreams, this book and all of this press tour and all of me yelling will be a moment where someone somewhere who decides who gets to have access to these platforms will decide, you know what, you know, we need some other voices. We need some other voices, you know, because again, I really do believe the politics will change, you know, if that happens. So you know, I don't have like big picture solutions. I don't have, you know, okay, you know, what does it mean to decolonize? You know, what does it mean to, you know, one state, two state, you know, binational state? I don't like, I'm not that person. But I think there are people like that, you know, who do know, who can speak, you know, to it in a way that is, you know, much more deeper and more profound than I did. You're correct. I did, you're not you, but, you know, the critique is correct. I did only spend 10 days. But there are Palestinians who have spent entire lifetimes there. And they should be telling the story.
You know, if a young Palestinian kid picks up the message and he reads, you know, part 4, which deals with Israel-Palestine, I mean, what do you hope their takeaway is?
I hope they feel like it was halfway decent. I hope they feel like, oh, yeah, this kind of does resemble the reality of what my life is. I hope that.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, on that note, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us in Real Talk. I appreciate you coming on. This was an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, brother. You have a good one, okay?
You too.